I'm going to introduce Dr. Wood and his panel now. Dr. Wood is the chair of our transpersonal departments. And he's also an alum. We were talking about alums. And he holds so many functions in so many ways for Sophia University. So we're very grateful to him for his presence in the many ways that he brings it with all of his gifts. And Anshu teaches in the MATPC, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure to have you here. And she is a transpersonalist, but also a clinician. And she also holds amazing space and has some great classes. And is a very, how would you say, it's a force of nature from also a very feminine perspective, right? So she has small children and she shows up very much in that very powerful way. And then we have Dr. Zhu, who is the chair of our PhDC, who is a scholar who has spent many years looking at transpersonal from different viewpoints. His viewpoint is more from the where he was born in this Asian perspective. And then how do you integrate that with a Western? And is there a way? And all the ins and outs of that. And making that into an experience. And amazing conversations to be had with Dr. Zhu, just saying. So great scholar. Thank you for coming, Dr. Zhu.
Pleasure, my pleasure.
And then we have Candida Crasto. I keep on doing that. I don't know why, right? Like, interesting. And she is part of our EIDA committee. She is also a force of nature, holds us to many of these precepts, helps in bringing together some of the surveys, some of the questions, some of the conversations. She is also an immense loving person that is able to bring everybody in and integrate this diversity and inclusion in so many ways. And besides that, she's a scholar of her own right. And I think you're nearly done, right? Your PhD, you're there.
Masters.
Okay. Yeah, our masters.
You're speaking about the future.
Yes, okay, well, so, okay. That's my, yes, my future reading. Because of all of that, beautiful work. She's also put in submissions, so you'll be able to hear her speak on her own topic. And so check her out, please, in the program to then hear some of her research specifically. Okay, off you are. So how are archetypes influential in your life? Dr. Wood.
Well, thank you, Dorothy, and thank you for the opportunity to hang out with three of my most favorite people, as well as you all there that I can't see or those online. Thank you for being here. We were each going to introduce ourselves, and I had in mind a more traditional introduction, like saying, I have all these degrees and stuff. And in fact, my degrees are kind of part of why archetypes are important to me. I am going to talk a little bit about the hero's journey when it gets to that, but at a certain point in my life, when I was doing business stuff, I'm a lawyer and an MBA, I received a calling to do something different. And that's when I started to pursue transpersonal psychology. And I think that journey has given me something that I try to share with my students. So that's why archetypes are important to me. I kind of feel like I'm living it. So Caifang, you want to go next?
To introduce?
In the introduction?
Oh. I thought I was the last. I'm going to be the last, but okay. Uh, well, as I said, I'm living in China, Beijing. It's at 6 o'clock a.m. now. Currently, I am chairing the transpersonal psychology doctoral program in Chinese, known as PhD-C. Archetypes are important. What I'm going to talk about today is an archetype, the goddess, archetype of goddess. In Chinese system, in Chinese tradition, is a Avalokiteshvara, or Guanyin in Chinese culture, history, or in Buddhism. I see Avalokiteshvara or Guanyin as very empowering, very healing, transformational, and the transcendent delivery. These qualities are all what I need. I sometimes indeed practice that. It means not just a religious or spiritual archetype, but also it's a part of my life. I I practice that and I study it as not only as part of culture but also as a part of daily life. Okay, is that enough?
Yep, that's perfect. How about you, Ann?
Sorry, we threw you off, Caifang, because I didn't jump in there to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I can't really see you, but I can see the classroom though, and we'll be there pretty soon. I am the lead faculty for the master's program in transpersonal psychology and in Chinese. I'm also a clinical psychologist practicing here in Denver, Colorado. But before getting here, I was practicing in Taiwan also as a clinical psychologist. And I was also licensed in China as well. And I would say from the perspective of being in this very privileged seat where I get the honor of hearing people talk about their worst nightmares, maybe just all their broken heart stories. Sometimes it's hard to find faith in humanity. And I will say this, I find my own ways to pray for my clients. And so today, later on, I want to talk a little bit about what praying may look like in a transcultural sense and with the help of some archetypes. And previously, I've tried to practice just a compassionate route, like what Caifang was mentioning, with Guanyin as a figure to look up to and to gather strength and comfort from. And then later on, I found myself more and more drawn to a general. He's a warrior and a scholar. So there's somewhere in there, I'm trying to learn from this figure how to be a practitioner, but also be a scholar at the same time. So it's my privilege to join this conversation with all of our great panelists shortly.
Well said. Well said, Anne.
Candida.
I guess that leaves me. I feel really honored to be on this panel. As Dorothée said, I'm a student finishing my MACP, so Master's in Counseling Psychology at Sophia, and have just been completely smitten and captivated by the transpersonal nature of the program. And so a lot of my interest and fascination with archetypes has come in parallel through personal research and personal application of archetypes as a way of working in my clinical practice, currently in my internship, with a lot of clients. I also represent the EIDA committee today, and Archetypes has given me a language to understand how to work not only with the individual, but through the collective, understanding the repeating patterns and trends that we see. And so while I haven't identified one archetype as a primary focus of my research at this point, I really feel quite comfortable in the language of archetypes as a symbolic language of connecting to the transpersonal, connecting to the spiritual and to the divine. And how I bring that out with my clients is also a reflection of my own journey and process of being able to identify archetypal patterns and symbols, not only on the individual level, but globally as well. So being a part of this panel is a really unique experience for me to be able to share something quite personal and also very much in the works as I become a therapist. A little more intro about myself is that I come from a background in chemical engineering a long time ago. And as I've slowly allowed my career to evolve and move me into the right space, finding Sophia University was a critical step in my process in becoming a mental health practitioner and clinician, but also really a big stepping stone towards transpersonal research that has driven a lot of my personal and professional pursuits over the last couple of years. So I'm very excited to be here and to engage in more conversation with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Well said. Well, I'm going to start off, and then Anne will follow me, and Candida will follow her, and Caifang will wrap up with a little bit of a presentation on what we just gave you in our introduction. And that is how we think from our different perspectives, archetypes can help with mental health, which is, of course, what we're talking about in this conference. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm going to talk about the hero's journey. And I said that I felt in my life that I had experienced some of the elements of that archetypal journey of the hero. And that doesn't mean that I think I'm a hero in the sense that you would think of like Superman or Ryan Gosling or somebody like that. I mean, I'm a very normal guy living a very normal life. But every normal guy out there and gal or person, whatever, who lives a life can view that life as a hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell wrote a lot about the hero's journey, and he in fact called it the monomyth. All myths are really structured around the hero's journey. Every story you've heard has the elements of a hero's journey in his mind. And he studied, as you may know, myths from all around the world. But in that study, he said that that a hero's journey basically has three stages. It has the departure, the initiation, and the return. And I would argue that even before the departure, there is another element to the hero's journey, and that is the calling. And it often takes a lifetime. Like Bill Plotkin wrote, for example, in Nature and the Human Soul. He said, young analysts and Jung himself say that it's rare to be ready for the descent to soul until midlife, until, say, our mid-40s. They're probably correct about modern Europeans, that is, but many nature-based people say their youth are ready at puberty. But there's a certain element of preparation, and we can relate to it, most of us in our modern societies, that you kind of get to your adolescence at least, and probably further on before you have, you're ready for the calling. You've had enough experience in life that you can actually hear, what is it that I am meant to do in life? And I find it interesting that, I mean, that's in my own life, it was in my mid to late 40s that, you know, I'm on this treadmill of life going along, doing, you know, kind of what's expected of me. And you feel a certain sense of dissatisfaction or something with what's going on, and sense that you were called to do something higher. And there's actually some danger, mental health danger, in not listening to that calling. If you just stay on the treadmill and keep going and never hear the calling of being fully, completely who you are meant to be, you may find some sort of mental illness being associated with that, trying to deny yourself who you are. And I find it interesting that a lot of our students in transpersonal psychology are at about that point in their lives. You know, our students are a little older, and they have, they've lived life, and then something calls them. And I love interviewing these students. I get to interview all of the English-speaking students who are admitted to our program. And it's just so interesting to think of it in terms of, you are a hero. You've heard the calling. I mean, the work is ahead, right? There are challenges ahead, but you've heard the calling, which is the first step. And then the next step in a hero's journey is departure. And what that means is kind of leaving something behind and embracing something new in your life. And you cross a threshold. You actually step over a threshold. Here's my old life. And, you know, there's all these myths about death and rebirth. This is what those myths are about. They're talking about dying to an old way and being reborn to a new way. And the departure can be a very emotional occurrence in your life. I mean, you actually feel this is a shift, you know. And what you depart into is, or what Campbell called the initiation, or a series of trials, is another way I've read that it's described. And the hero has to overcome these trials, and it's in a new world. He's departed his old world, and he's stepped into a new world. And there are invariably obstacles that are placed in front of him. And this, I think, relates directly to how archetypes can help with mental health. We all have trials. Everyone in life has trials. And I know that when the trials are happening to us, we often feel like, you know, oh, woe is me. Look at all this stuff that's happening to me, all this stuff, all these things I have to overcome. But I think it's helpful to realize that you are a hero in your own life. And these trials are put in front of you to give you the opportunity to overcome them and to be fully, you know, with the goal of being fully who you are. And that the trials are not going to, they're not going to break you. You have it within you to overcome those trials. And you'll be so much stronger for facing them and saying, oh no, I'm not going back. I'm not going to go back to my old life, depart this venture that I've gone on. I'm going to fight through it and go through it. And in the process of overcoming these trials, we receive something. We receive some kind of gift or vision or perspective that is going to enable us to help other people as well. So your purpose in proceeding on a hero's journey is not just so that you can at the end say, I'm a hero. I did it. I made it. I overcame these obstacles. The purpose is to take that knowledge that you gained by fighting and overcoming the obstacles and learning, and gaining wisdom, and bringing this boon, this gift that you have, which is a unique gift. Only you can bring the gift of you to the world. And you bring this back, and that's the return, the final phase of the hero's journey, where you bring it back to your people and you share with them this gift that you have received through your hard work and your courage and your continued fighting. And so that's why to me, it's such a blessing to be able to teach. It's not such a blessing to be able to administer. I'll tell you that right now, but the teaching part of it is awesome. And it's such a blessing to be able to teach. And watch others. That's what the real blessing is to watch others as they're on their own hero's journey, overcoming the obstacles that are placed in front of them and gaining wisdom, which they take back to their people. It is so cool to see. So anyway, that's my take on the hero's journey, the monomyth, as Joseph Campbell would call it, of how we can view our lives as a hero's journey and view the obstacles and challenges in our lives as opportunities to learn something that we can share with the world. And I'll end by saying what I always say, and that is that the greatest gift that you can give to yourself, and in fact, that you can give to the world, is to be 100% completely and fully who you are. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Robert. As you were describing the hero's journey, I don't know about everybody else, but I wonder if you try to think about which stages at which point of your life each one of those milestones hit for you and what that's like. I know I went down memory lane, and I don't know when the next calling is going to be, but I like the fact that you are almost setting this up for my little topic because of the word hero. I don't know what that conjures up for you, but Robert did also mention courage. And that is one of the prominent things that I seek in my clients. And in fact, I applaud them for having courage when they first reach out. If you don't mind, I'd like to invite you to just take a moment and maybe think about some recent things that's really touched you, whether it's things in the current events or, you know, in your current life, or the happenings of your loved ones around you, something that touches you, but maybe also makes you question about justice, something that makes you ask for more strength what sort of images come up for you, and where do you lean for strength? The other day, as I'm sure many of you have seen images of this too, but it was just on my feed of a young father reaching to connect with his recently lost twins by touching the body bag. And it just, I don't know how he deals with it. Even I think every breath would hurt so much. And all of those around him, I don't know how they can hold space for him. And then meanwhile, on our national news, we hear things about money being spent on trying to make certain candidates look very much human while they demonize their opponents. Just takes me time to adjust and go, where can I find hope or confidence that there will be some justice somewhere? And on a day in and day out basis, when you work with clients who do not want to release their emotional, I don't know what you want to call it, heaviness onto their loved ones. So they choose to speak to someone, a third party, right? How do I help them? Aside from helping them regulate themselves and knowing that in regulating themselves, they will find their own way. I'll give you one particular example of how archetypes, or how I use archetypes very recently in mental health. As this young client was going through so much and has such a cultural history lineage associated with places that's just torn with war right now. They're having a really tough time looking for a greater sense of strength. And they really wanted to know how to pray. But yet there's so much resistance to the word prayer. There's such a deep association with something that they found fundamentally unacceptable. Okay. Particularly, they mentioned Western religion, this male, white male figure. That's not how they feel a connection or comfort or trust or safety. So we had to go in there and we talked about prayers. I don't know what your definition of prayers are, but somehow we started talking about oracle cards, and some oracle cards would present certain prayers. In particular, we ended up talking about Saint Michael. And I was first actually introduced to Saint Michael, I believe, at looking at these symbols here and there when I met Roger, my spouse. And he used to be a firefighter. And this is something that they kept in their office all the time. And so I was curious, but there's also some resemblance between Saint Michael and Guan Yu, who, when I took a whole bunch of firefighters over for a cultural exchange into Taiwan and visited firefighters there, they had Guan Yu everywhere. Okay. So now we're talking about first responders that see physical tragedies day in and day out, and they go towards, they're drawn towards the same archetype. Guan Yu and Saint Michael, they both hold a sword. Okay, it's a little bit different. I think Guan Yu's sword is like a wheeled, jaded crescent blade. Okay, but it symbolizes a fight. There's going to be a fight, and they're willing to sacrifice for something that they believe is right, and they are resilient. I think that's what the sword means. There's a willingness to fight. But Guan Yu, mind you, is not a white male. Guan Yu is red. He's very red. And in every depiction of him, his face is always painted red because he knows anger. He shows up like he is comfortable releasing anger out there. And that's something that I find some of my clients, especially those with just trauma-ridden clients, seem to have difficulty releasing or give permission for anger. And as we know, anger is a secondary emotion. We can always look back behind what is behind the anger. So if anger is a reflection of injustice, how do you release it? How do you give it? Tying us back to prayer. We came up with a definition for this client that a prayer is to give our concerns to something greater, someone greater, a force that is greater, okay? And also to give permission for a justice to intervene, okay? Give permission that the force will come in and help with the situation so that we're no longer a container of all the concerns and anxieties, but we're releasing that. But also at the same time, we allow for help. Okay, so that is one thing that we did. Another thing that helped was to introduce an image that does not look anywhere close to what they imagined would be a figure that they would find strength in. Because now this image is culturally foreign to the client. They don't have preconceived connotations attached. So they're able to look at it in a more, take a fresher look at this and be more open-minded to receive the same symbol that it stands for, which is courage, resilience, willingness to sacrifice for justice. And it became something for this particular client to look to, not necessarily that they're going to become a warrior themselves, but that they can find a place to send their worries to. And this place has that transcultural archetype that we all need when we don't know what justice looks like right now. So with that, I invite you to think about your own individual prayers and what kind of archetypes you can find strength in. Thank you, and let's welcome Candida.
Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate a lot of the personal stories that you shared and so much of your experience. And I'm glad you talk about prayer, because a lot of what has brought spirituality and divinity back into my life is really the process of studying the human existence, human purpose, human condition. And in my study of archetypes, one of the people and the authors of archetypes that I find resonates very strongly is Caroline Myss. And she talks about the concept of a sacred contract, which gives us really an understanding of what is the divine order or purpose for which we have shown up in this human life. And from that, where it really leads is this idea of how do I bring that into my clinical practice? And that's something that I'll keep coming back to. And so the idea of a sacred contract tells us that at some level, there is a promise, there is a purpose, there is a way in which we are meant to find the connection between the human and the divine within this lifetime, and use that to align, and this is of course my philosophy, but to align our integrity of the soul, of divine order, and of the choices we make as humans in order to live out our fullest potential. And Robert, I think you mentioned something about being our authentic selves and being our full authentic selves. And part of this authenticity in the study of archetypes is really being able to identify over time the constant archetypes that one finds in their lives, repeating patterns, and from those, understanding the duality of each archetype, the shadow side, the light side, the weaknesses and the strengths, because in each archetype, in the hero, in the warrior, without integrity and awareness, there is a shadow side that can be corrupted and lead to a lot of the challenges that, Anne, I'm sure you see, and that I also see in clinical practice, where people are coming in with varying challenges that both have a very human and spiritual nature. Once we connect to that channel through prayer, through conversation, through callings and synchronicities, we allow ourselves to start speaking a symbolic and spiritual language. And the spiritual language is archetypal in nature, it is symbolic. It's very difficult to discern a clear, written, cognitively sound message from the divine, but we can see that in the stories that are shared transculturally, in the challenges that we face transculturally as well. And so as we start to identify the archetypes, which tend to be the repeating patterns that we see from early childhood or even pre-birth all the way through adolescence and adulthood, not only are we identifying personal archetypal patterns, but we're also acknowledging that in all sorts of religious and also scientific traditions, we understand that there are archetypal phases of life as well, whether you call that human development or the rites and rituals of Catholicism or the 7 energy centers of the body. Each of these are spaces for evolution in our lives and find themselves cyclical in nature. So now not only are we relating to a collective through repeating patterns that we see in multiple cultures, but we're also relating to a universal development of self, which in some cases may follow the hero's journey or the warrior's journey, and those may intersect at different times. And so as I work with clients, there are 4 archetypes that Caroline Myss says show up in every person in some way, in some areas. And I found that those 4 archetypes typically show up in the initial sessions of my clients. And those 4 are the child, the victim, the saboteur, and the prostitute. And so the child, with a few adjectives, is the playful, the innocent, sometimes the weak, seeking survival, seeking love, seeking belonging. And as we start to identify that archetype in ourselves and where those traits show up, whether it's in relationships or profession or in money, in any of the areas of our lives that are also in their own way universal categories of how we perceive ourselves, we examine a lot of these archetypes with different clients to really help them understand that for every shadow, there is a light. For every feeling of not understanding or not having that clarity or being far away from self in a transpersonal way, there's the ability to call back that energy to call back that integrity of soul and self, to become aware of and awaken to the clarity of that pattern. The victim, of course, comes out in a lot of people who've experienced violence or experienced abuse. The victim has a certain quality to it that it also draws people in, the attention, the love, the recuperation and healing. But on the other side, staying in the victim from a lack of clarity can allow someone to really surrender some of the choice and autonomy that they have in their lives. The saboteur is often seen as the critic, and the critic, as we know, has a duality as well. One who discerns and judges and looks at risk, and so makes choices from a standpoint of survival and safety. But oftentimes the saboteur, untethered, can also keep us from realizing that full potential and actualization. And the last, and I think most interesting, and maybe this is just a projection of my personal journey, is the prostitute. And this is really a transactional archetype that says, what am I willing to sell my soul for? And whether that is love or financial security or a family or to be in a certain place. Oftentimes, when I look at the clients in the early stage of their journey, most of them are sitting in the shadow side of one or more of these 4 shared archetypes. And to help a client, to hold space for a client, to be able to discover which archetypes, where they're showing up, how they're showing up, is a journey that we both go on in a way of being able to discover not only the archetype, but also that integrated self that exists at the seat and the space between these patterns, between these energies. And working through these archetypes also, I find, creates a sense of hope, creates a sense of autonomy and choice, because the awareness of such patterns not only gives us the responsibility, but the opportunity to start aligning our choices with the highest integrity of our soul. And when I take that into the transpersonal and recognize the value of transpersonal psychology and clinical work, I also see that, and this relates to prayer, and this relates to sort of the duality of will and the divine, is this understanding that while we have choice and we have choice that affects our lives and others, there is also a divine order that requires us to seek awareness and understanding of who we are in the collective, who we are as individuals, and to find that equilibrium and balance in the duality of all of these archetypes, in all of these phases and symbolic processes and rituals that we experience as humans, so that we may show up again as our authentic selves. And I'll stop there and pass it over to Caifang.
Thank you, Candida, right? Well, I've been listening to all of my colleagues, 3 colleagues, and I think indeed we are a panel, we are panelists, and we are speaking about archetypes, about personal journey and how the transpersonal has been helping us, as helping our clients as well. Robert is very good at narrating a hero's journey, and I feel like, wow, I feel like I am also on my, I have been on my journey as well. The calling, the initiation, the calling, the what's the first stage? The departure, right? And initiation and returning. Let me double check. Is that correct, Robert? I I think I am no longer very concerned about calling. You know, but at certain time I felt like I was called. Not in the Christian sense, but in the Buddhist sense. They are comparable, they are different, and we are talking about archetypes through culture and history. Nonetheless, there was a kind of calling, but I have to I have to admit, my calling, the calling to me was not really from the other, more from, you know, my need to transcend, my need to heal, to transform myself. And then I started to read and practice the spiritual stuff, so to speak. And the more I studied the Taoism first. When I couldn't find a Taoist teacher, guru, I switched to Buddhism, Chan Buddhism. There I was introduced to a real guru that I continued to study Chan Buddhism. In the practice of meditation, you know, in Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, I started to resonate with some kind of calling. Well, I was supposed to, or I was reading scriptures, and you know, the Mahayana Buddhism features, you know, serving others, serving yourself and serving others, benefiting yourself and others, awakening yourself and others, and finally taking across yourself and the others. Taking across meaning delivering, to use the word, spiritual word, transpersonal word. You know, you go from this side of the shore to the other side of the shore, of the bank. You take across yourself. So I started to believe, in order to take myself across, to wake myself across, I need to, in the meantime, to learn to take others across as well. I need to benefit others as well. In this process of benefiting myself by practicing meditation and visualization of a archetypal Buddhist figure, like Avalokiteshvara Guanyin in Chinese, I vow, you know, to serve myself and to serve others as well. So it has to be, you know, on the one hand to practice myself, and on the other hand to practice for the sake of millions of kind of what is known as a what's the word? 众生无量众生无量誓愿度，无量innumerous, right? Numberless sentient beings. I vow to take them across. In my process of taking myself across this suffering world, this a suffering life. So now there's the departure, and then the trials, a lot of trials. Sometimes I felt I'm benefiting, I'm getting healed, I'm getting more benefits by practicing. And I'm also serving people, helping people. By the way, I also have a small counseling practice in China, not in the States. So I recently, actually, I have a client who indeed needs to integrate this spiritual transpersonal practice. And I discussed with her, you know, knowing her background, she is very intellectual. She actually got her master degree, got her BA and master degree in the States, and was working on her PhD. Then she became depressed, was not able to move on, and had to give up, and came back to China. She found me, and we worked together for almost now a year. She was on and off, you know, moving ahead and then coming back and having setback for a period of time. And at a certain time, we discussed that she could try, you know, try to follow the Avalokiteshvara's way, the Guanyin way, the Guanyin method, by reading scriptures, because she couldn't be, she wasn't motivated by many. She has, as you know, as psychologists, depressed person loses almost all interests. So she has no interest. She's very confined to her home, to her parents only. Socially, she's very isolated, and you know, she just keeps staying at home and without having any socialization, almost none, except with her close relatives. And she doesn't do much at home either. So she finds a motivated to read the scriptures, Buddhist scriptures, Buddhist sutras. So I said, well, why don't you go ahead? And also practice Guanyin, you know, since you know, Guanyin in Chinese Buddhism is often in the form of a female bodhisattva. Although in traditional Indian Buddhism, it could be he, a male, but more often than not, in Chinese Buddhism, Guanyin is a woman, a female goddess, if you wish. And I said, well, there are 32, at least 32, 33 transformation bodies of Guanyin. Sometimes they say 32, 33 different numbers. I said, well, there are many. Most of them are female manifestations. And why don't you just go through them and see which of the figures, which of the manifestations or transformation bodies is most appealing to you, and what are the qualities behind? Read a little bit and find the qualities or the attributes behind each of these transformation bodies. 化身应身32化身32应身 and so she went ahead and she did something, and now she's still doing this homework, and before she comes to see me again, she's supposed to be reading sutras every day, at least something, and just write me a very short report saying, hey, I did it in the WeChat. And that seems to be working quite a bit, because she at least feels like she's doing something interesting, something meaningful, rather than just lying down on the bed and feeling pretty depressed and feeling that one day has passed again without doing anything meaningful. All right. So, and myself, I have been practicing meditation for more than 30 years now. Early on, I was practicing strictly Zen Chan Buddhism without much, if any, spiritual or religious connotations. You know, just watch your breath and watch your thoughts, watch my thoughts in Chan Buddhism. 起心动念, you just be watching and let the thoughts come and let them go. You just keep watching and moved and relaxed. And that, you know, when thoughts come up, when emotions come up, they are the manifestations, or they're displaying the unconscious, the repressed stuff. Now they become available, they become conscious. And I said, oh, yes, that's it. Well, but later on, I found this detached practice of meditation, keeping just watching thoughts, watching emotions, and grounded, is not very interesting anymore. I mean, it's helpful. It's more humanistic. It's transpersonal. It's more humanistic because it's relying on my own power, to use the word. But transpersonal, well, depending on how you define transpersonal. I mean, do we really rely on the power of myself? And again, we have to define the self. Jung's self, Carl Jung's self, is different from the mainstream psychology talking about the self. So, but in Chan Buddhism, generally, I'm going to rely on myself, my own power as an individual. But in spiritual or in Western archetypes of a goddess or god or the higher power, the power is from the other. Either it's the other somewhere in the universe, or or anywhere around you, but it's the other. So without going into the differentiation or distinction between the other and the self, I started to visualize Guan Yin. Well, I would say it's the other, okay, in this sense. So as a complement, as a complement practice of relying the self power, just breathing, watching, and watching thoughts, and let them come, let them go, and then at a certain point, I hit the non-differentiation state of mind. That is indeed a sort of deliverance. It's a complete collapse of the differentiation between the self, the ego, and the self, as well as the self or the ego and the universe, the being. But it doesn't come often. So deliverance doesn't come very easily. It does come. Now, by watching how much time do I have? By visualizing Guan Yin, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva I wouldn't use the word saving. I would use the empowering archetype or the transformative archetype. I feel like it's very powerful. It's very effective. And so I have been using this practice of visualizing Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. My visualization is that of the 千眼观世音菩萨. It's 1,000 eye, 1,000 arms of Avalokiteshvara. As I said, there are 33 manifestations of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, Guanyin Pusa. So, and there are many others, 32, 33. So I often visualize this, and I feel empowered. I feel empowered, to heal myself, to transform myself when I'm anxious or when I'm having some physical illness or physical discomfort, or sometimes kind of low energy. And I also encourage, my client to pick one of those manifestations that she favors. Well, it depends on the client or their preference. But in general, this I call it archetype, and the spiritual archetype. I think it's something that human beings in general need to have in order to empower ourselves, to heal ourselves, to transform ourselves whenever we are in a difficult time or difficult situation. I'm also, of course, recognizing the self-power. I still, we have as a human beings, we have enormous potentials. As a humanistic psychologists would argue, we have already a lot of potentials to tap, but adding the other power, so to speak, to help us to rely on can be more powerful, more effective. So I am, I think this is what I want to say. I don't know whether this is coming back to the circle or not. Robert, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Caifang. Thank you very much. And thank you, Anne, and thank you, Candida. I'd like to open it now to questions that any of our listeners, watchers, whatever, may have. And you can direct your question to us generally or to one of us specifically.
Thank you. Oh, that was beautiful. And really beautiful. So thank you for sharing. There are questions, yes. No, we're not gonna do the mic. Why don't you just come, yeah, that was just, we had a traumatic experience with a mic this morning. And we're not sure whether it was the mic or whether it was one of the cables, but it was like an exploding volcano happening in the room every time it decided to speak. And so we're going to scratch that. Ava, why don't you come up here and ask your question? I think. So if you stand, yeah, or you can stand right there, because that's where the sound is. Yeah, no touching.
No touching. Okay. Yeah, this is a question on naming the archetype when you are working with it with clients. For instance, Candida, you were talking about the child, the victim, the saboteur, and the prostitute. Dr. Wood, you were speaking about the hero's journey, and there were some spiritual archetypes that, hello, Dr. Zhu, Avalokiteshvara and Guan Yin. Now, in some cases, these would probably be powerfully positive for the person to experience as the other. But what about, and this is almost specifically to Candida, do you use the name the prostitute or the victim when you are actually working with your clients, or do you visualize the attributes of that archetype and the energy of it and relay that aspect and work in a little bit more of a non-specific way?
Thank you. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And to your point, I think the potential of the negative connotation of labeling is something that I take very carefully in clinical practice. And so it's rare that I'm explaining archetypes or using even child and victim in addition to saboteur and prostitute. But having that understanding of these, as you mentioned, allows me to create space and to help reflect aspects of each of these archetypes in a way that a client can connect to them. This also goes really hand in hand with psychosynthesis and parts work. And there are a number of frameworks for parts work in psychotherapy and in any type of coaching or practice. And so psychosynthesis, of course, posits that there are also subpersonalities and parts, and that one of the ways to understand oneself is to understand an authentic unifying center. So a concept, or let's say the light of an archetype side, that allows one to feel that they are existing in their authentic self versus a survival personality or survival unifying center, which forces us into the shadow side of these archetypes. So I use a lot of psychosynthesis in my work with the idea of subpersonalities and parts. And instead of using those 4 labels, I usually allow the client, through a mindfulness or meditation practice, to identify various parts and give them names, and to come up with the traits and the behaviors and actions of those parts. And oftentimes a client will identify a child. And right now in pop psychology as well, there's a lot of inner child work that circulates. And so people are starting to build a very nascent vocabulary around archetypes and around parts work that does also help with a lot of my younger clients.
Yeah, so that was helpful. Yeah, it's a great thing, right? It's in the room, right? This archetype, like it then arises, and I think not only in clinical practice, but in other, even if we are in community, or what is arising, do we name it? Do we not name it? If it's personal, do we name it? Do we not name it? Do we share it? Do we keep it for ourselves? So yeah, I guess it sort of depends on the situation. Yeah, and it looked
I
like
just
you were
wanted
gonna say something. Yeah.
I can't figure out which book this one is in, but it's probably in the Awakening the Heroes Within. It's something that if you're a practitioner, you're wanting to start this, it has a basic questionnaire, I think, in it. And there are conversations you can have with your clients, kind of introducing them what archetypes are, and for them to discover that process themselves. And I would say too, the labeling is so much like the connotations that we place on anything is when we can give them something a little bit more neutral and allow whatever's within to come out. That's a lot more meaningful and a lot more powerful. And the same can be said, even though the example I gave earlier was of a Western client and I gave him an Eastern archetype. I have also done that for an Eastern client, giving them a Western archetype that they're less familiar with, so that they can look at it with a more open-minded approach.
Great. Anyone else?
There's a question in the
Is there a
chat.
question in the chat? I have another one too. I'll
Yeah,
keep it.
from
Yes,
Alexandra G. I'll read it if that's all right.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Please do.
How once you return, do you prevent yourself from returning to the dark side of the 4 archetypes in your life? That kind of sounds like it's going to you, Candida, talking about the 4 archetypes. Yeah.
Well, I'll begin, but I'm going to pass it to you, Robert. Just wait for this.
Okay.
So one of the things that I think this touches on is begging the question of what is the purpose of, let's say, clinical psychotherapy, and also what is life's purpose, but I won't go all the way there just yet. When I look at the purpose of psychotherapy, my personal belief is for one to connect in their own way to something authentic, and then to use that as a stepping stone to continue their journey as a person. When we talk about returning to self, so calling that energy back, finding that awareness and integrity, the experience of self versus being over-identified with a part, the purpose here kind of reminds me a lot of processing trauma or healing, whereby you may process and understand trauma and build a different narrative, but that doesn't erase the trauma or the memory of the trauma from your body, from your soul, from your spirit. And so part of it is an acceptance of how these archetypes and their shadow sides will always live and exist within you. And so a lot of what I focus on is finding the equilibrium and balance whereby you can have awareness. And then as you use that awareness to make choice towards integrity, you then find yourself in the light side of these archetypes. And truthfully, I think everything is cyclical, but one of the most powerful archetypes that people can then start to resonate with is the hero's journey, whereby one is really experiencing the cyclical nature of up and down and danger and fear and making that choice of moving forward.
Yeah, Candida, thank you for that. And my thought on this question was the hero's journey is not one and done, you know. It's it's like I think that in a way almost every day is a little mini hero's journey. And I was trying to speak in terms of you know, viewing your whole life as a hero's journey. But there are definitely cycles in life, and it's not like you return and you got all the wisdom and you're done. Part of the wisdom you have is that it's going to happen again, and or you know, you are still working on it. So yeah, I had a question for Caifang, unless someone else has a question.
Hold on, yeah, well, of course you can ask a question. I have one too for Caifang, but after you. Anyone else here with a question to throw in? No? Okay, Robert, go.
Yeah, you know, you said something interesting, Caifang, about talking about like a Christian calling as something that comes from outside, and maybe that another way of viewing that calling is that it comes from the, you know, from inside. And I guess I tend to think of ourselves in kind of Jungian terms. And that is that the other can actually be the true us. In our unconscious, something that comes to our mind or that bubbles to the surface, like a calling, may actually come from our own unconscious or our deep self, if you will. Does that fit with what you were talking about?
So you are using the Jungian lens to frame my labeling, say the other and the calling from the other power and the versus the self, my own. So you are saying the other. Are you saying the other is, according to Jung, is the unconscious? Well, Jung would say that's it, but I don't know how he reconciled on, or he was not able to reconcile with the with his religious traditions. Of course, I see the point there. The you know, the other power or the higher power, according to Jung, is indeed the unconscious. He had a very clear writing in his book. I think the two essays on the collective unconscious. I forgot. I wrote an article in response to his point when he commented on the secret of the golden flower, the psychology. I responded to his commentary. I particularly pointed out that his point of comparing the higher power or higher consciousness in Eastern meditation to the unconscious is wrong, I said. So the higher power, either in Eastern religions or in Western religion, is at least more apparently in Western religions, it's transcendent but without. It's outside. It's the other. But Jung would say I think he would say it's unconscious. You're right. So I can see I can say, what's the word? I can empathize with him. I can empathize with his position. But I'm also skeptical to that point. Especially nowadays, we say, there's a lot of dark energy, dark matter around us in the universe. And these dark matters, dark energy has been influencing us one way or another without our consciousness, without our awareness. They're influencing us. We're not able to see them. They are invisible. These forces are invisible. Or whether you call it the high power or the other power, I don't know. But it's scientifically or it's a belief that the dark energy is around us, is penetrating us even. But there's one reference along this side. Robert Jung does say the high altar and the low altar. The high altar and low altar. I think he used the word altar. He says the Western religion is like the high altar. And the Eastern religion is, as a metaphor, he used the word low altar. He was particularly comparing the Christian or the monotheistic tradition in the West and the Indian tradition, spiritual tradition. The low altar is selflessness, the egolessness and selflessness. So it's we're grounding, we're losing the egoistic traits. When you're practicing, ironically or paradoxically, the high power is found in the selflessness. So that's what he calls the low altar, and the high altar is the Western. It's the being in God, in union with God, at least in Jesus Christ. So that's his differentiation. I don't know whether that helps.
I just knew you'd have a really interesting answer to that. And it was interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Caifang, I was wondering, why Kuan Yin? Out of all the figures, yeah, in Chan Buddhism, why does she come to you? That woman with all those arms.
Well, 1,000 arms and eyes to mean that Guan Yin is is super powerful. She has more arms, has more eyes to look around for people in need for help. She's always looking around the world to see who is in need of help. And arms, you help with your arms, with your hands. So I think that's the short answer to the analogy. But Guan Yin, Avalokiteshvara and Guan Yin, they sound very different. It kind of very Guan Yin in Chinese is hearing and visualizing the sound of those crying for help. Guan Yin and in the world, Guan Shi Yin, hearing the sound of hearing the sound of the voices of people in need in the world. That's the literal translation, literal meaning of Guan Yin, Guan Shi Yin.
I mean, if you think about it, it's interesting because we were talking about the call, right? And that's how that started with Robert, Dr. Wood putting that out, you know, is the call or the refusal to call. And so it's like she's calling and you're calling, and so that becomes this archetype that wraps it all beautifully, you know, endlessly, I want to say. So just feel that. Thank you. Dr. Wood, I do have a question for you. So this refusal to call is so interesting. Yeah, we also addressed that in the MBA when we study this. Do you think that there is an archetype that people would know of in the West? And maybe there is in the East or South, North, wherever. Of that refusal to call, because it's a thing, right? I mean, it is a palpable energy. It's a no, I don't want to get on that train, that boat, you know, that calling from this creature with all these arms, you know, looking at me and who's really helping, you know, but I don't want. So can you, or not just Dr. Wood, you know, anybody, is there like something that comes to mind? Because Anne keeps on going, yes, yes, yes.
Looks like Anne's got an answer. Let's go.
Yeah, Anne's got an answer.
Let's hear Anne.
I'm gonna get Caifang's assist on this, but the rebel is one of the archetypes. And Caifang, when I'm thinking about the rebel, I'm thinking about Qigong.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he's kind of this like seemingly delusional, like looking like a homeless but a sage, and he would just draw things out of thin air and always drunk. But he's definitely an archetype. He's got his own ways of doing things.
Trickster. Maybe he's a
Caifang is
trickster. Could he be a trickster?
Trickster.
Maybe, yeah.
Fooling around.
Oh, trickster.
Fooling around. Yeah, fooling around and
I think
helping
trickster
people.
is good too over here.
Trickster.
Although
Anybody
someone
else?
could be called to be a trickster, I think. That
Yeah,
could be.
I think Anne Qigong could be a trickster. If you use an archetype, he's lovely. He's
Yeah.
very well. Yeah, he's very
Yeah,
popular.
trickster is lovely, and but maybe also rebel, right? So like it's this idea of the resistance to whatever's happening anyways, like.
He's the ultimate comic relief.
Yeah.
Mm.
It is in the Hollywood scripts, by the way, they have this set up like this, exactly step by step. And that's the winning recipe for Hollywood movies, is that our hero's journey exactly with that, right? With that element, like, no, I don't want to know what, oh yes, you're gonna, oh, maybe there'll be helpers. Oh, there they come. Okay, okay, now you're in the whale's, you know, stomach. What do you do? This is miserable. Oh, you're coming out. And so, yeah, thank you all so much for, and this was a beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
I also want to add that Dr. Zhu is going to be speaking tomorrow night, our time, on process work and Chan Buddhism, and how the two compare, differentiate, deep democracy. We're very much looking forward to on this end period. So I just wanted to give a heads up for everyone.
It's a new territory. I'm gonna risk taking.
Yes.
You heard the
Process
call.
oriented process. Yeah, it's a new call.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Woohoo. Yes, to that.
I learned a lot by preparing for the process oriented psychology. I learned quite a bit in my process of preparing for that. So let's see how it goes tomorrow.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Zhu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr.
Anne.
Zhu.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Candida. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.